I'd like to open it up to the floor, and maybe before we do that, Mari's highlighted the question of storage, and I think that leads us on to public acceptance. And as we know, 2 CCS projects were actually dropped because of local public opposition, one in Germany and one in Poland. I'd like to do a little sort of room poll and ask you if would you be prepared to live in an area knowing that there was large-scale storage of CO2 nearby? So if you'd be happy, you would have no worries about living near a large-scale operational or demonstration project, put your hands in the air. That looks like a majority.
Can I ask for the addresses, please, so that we now know where we can cite the carbon storage?
That looks like a majority, and probably most of you live in Brussels, so you have the possibility of voting yes on issues that will probably not affect you in the near future. But that's interesting. Maybe it's not the most representative audience either, but there seems to be a majority, so that's good. Mark, yeah, please.
Briefly, if you think of the whole system and living nearby, there's a difference between the power plant, which would be quite big, yeah, and potentially some noise, and the injection well, which would be so small as to be insignificant once it's established. So I could live by an injection well, to answer your question. I'd have more reservations about the power plant.
We're doing an event on shale gas in October, and I might ask the same question. I'll be quite interested to see how people react to that one. Okay, so your chance to have some fun. Do we have some questions from the audience? If not, I'm going to abuse my position as moderator. Oh, do we? Okay, gentleman here. If you could...
Thank you. I'm Francesco Maltini, a consultant in energy. We haven't discussed the real point of storage. I mean, what proof the supporter of CCS have that the gas, the CO2, will remain eternally on the ground? There's no proof at all. And the problem is very similar with nuclear waste, because today we are debating about nuclear power, and nuclear waste is a major issue because there's no guarantee that whatever you bury on the ground will remain such for 100 years. So what is the status of real research in storing? But on the other hand, how can the chemical industry today, who has done miracles in the past, could provide some new technologies on transforming CO2, because CO2 can be transformed as CO, or store the CO2 into, for example, calcium, and make it stable. And I think this is perhaps the way, if we want to pursue the CCS. I'm totally against the CCS, i.e. the reduction of emission, and of course the reduction of use of fossil fuel, which I think it's lethal. We've been gone through the 400 ppm of carbon emission in the atmosphere just recently, and the temperature of 2 degrees will be reached very soon, as it will reach 4 degrees, 5 degrees, etc. So there's perhaps a way that the chemical industry and perhaps Horizon 2020, may launch some projects on how to transform the CO2 or the CO with the industry, and perhaps the industry could find some solutions. Thank you.
Good. Yeah, Wolf, yeah.
Because it's a slightly technical question, let me take the first shot on this. Actually, the IPCC published in 2005 a special report on CCS, and this report actually summarized and evaluated the evidence which we have to guarantee long-term storage, long-term basically meaning so for thousands of years. And if I remember correctly, the statement in this report, the IPCC says that provided the storage site is well managed, the risk of leakage is less than 1% over 1,000 years, or something like that. There are two elements in this. First of all, it is not the idea of managing the storage site. So it depends how you select a storage site, what type of monitoring do you do, and what kind of interaction, management do you do to the storage site while you inject the CO2 and while the CO2 is stored. So this is one element in this for this answer. The second element is that in coming up with these very bold numbers, the IPCC actually looked at analogs, the natural analogs in geology. We do know that we have naturally occurring CO2 accumulations, particularly in the US, which have stored CO2 for millions of years. And actually they are used by and large for some of the enhanced oil recovery processes, which Marie mentioned. So that body of evidence is there. In addition, we have a pretty good understanding, both from experiments, but also from analogs, how CO2 interacts, or how CO2 behaves in the subsurface. And the point is now that actually is a difference to nuclear. If CO2 stays in the subsurface, it undergoes a number of chemical reactions, a number of trapping processes are operating, but the consequence of that is that CO2 becomes more immobilized with time, which is different by and large to nuclear. So CO2 will, if you leave everything as is, it will become more safe over time. This is, I think, the marked difference with nuclear storage. If you're really interested, because I think you have a little bit more come more from the technical side, I would encourage you to read that report. It gives you a whole list of papers and provide more details of the reasons of the reasoning behind the safety of storage sites than I can do right here, right now.
And there was a second question about the potential of the chemical industry to develop new methods of improving storage, or if I think,
again, CO2 is injected and it is stored. I mentioned we have 8 projects ongoing. One, the largest one, is operating or injecting over 10 million. I mean, right now there is no. I mean, we can do it. I mean, it's not science fiction. It is. We need policy. We don't need, I think, more experiments or more science on that.
If I may, talking to my colleagues on carbon capture and use of CO2. This is an element that certainly we would like to develop some research on under the Horizon 2020 banner. What the experts have said to me is that carbon dioxide is a relatively stable compound, and that in order to convert it into anything, you have to apply energy to it. So any process of converting CO2 into whatever it might be will require energy. And it's counterintuitive to do that. Having said that, I think it is an area that is useful to examine from a research perspective, because one of the areas that we're also looking at is the whole power to gas phenomenon of using excess capacity for wind to convert through hydrolysis to create gas. So I don't exclude it as an issue, but there's an awful lot of CO2 there to be converted, and I'm not sure that this is going to solve the problems. I think there may be pathways of interest, commercially viable ones as well, but I don't know that of itself it will be enough to absorb all of the carbon dioxide.
Well, I'm a novice to these things. I recognise that we need to do some more research, and we need to, in a number of member states across Europe, we need to have a better understanding of the geology, and we need to have a better assessment of what geology is appropriate for CO2 storage. But so the real question, and of course, as for what evidence we have, not enough in terms of where we have put CO2 underground. We obviously look at examples like Sleipner in Sala. There's two schemes, of course, off Norway. Sleipner's now been going for 14 years. I think 1 million tonnes a year of CO2 per year. No evidence whatsoever of any of it ever coming to the surface, or indeed, and the plume, the CO2 plume, has been closely monitored. I was always struck in Sala. I think they've stopped injecting now because the commercial reason for doing it is no longer there. But I was told that in Sala the CO2 plume about 2 kilometres underground could now be monitored from satellites, which strikes me as astonishing that you can do it. But I thought it had to be done by seismic testings all the time. But I'm told there's a scientific paper to show you can see the plume from a satellite. And therefore monitor where it is. But the real question is, the more I learn about what the oil and gas industry is doing, the more this seems to be utterly manageable. I mean, the oil and gas industry, besides the fact, of course, beneath our feet, there's huge quantities of an inflammable explosive gas called methane, which doesn't seem to be leaking to the surface a great deal. But the gas industry seems to be pumping gas down into the rock and pulling it back out again all the time. Tim can probably comment on this, but it does strike me as a lot more manageable than the impressions of novices like myself might first indicate.
You raised the issue of the plants in Norway. I mean, the installations in Norway. I mean, as a simple person, I mean, why are the Norwegians able to make it work, and why has the EU failed so utterly so far on this?
Well, the first, because they're stinking rich, let's be honest.
We have some rich countries in Europe. So.
And the second is because they have a carbon price. They've got a floor. They've got a carbon floor price. So the gas industry has to meet that. Has to pay for what it does with its CO2.
Okay. Mary, did you want to?
No, I just would like to echo the words of Wolf earlier and Chris. I think it is very important to realize that we have two analogues, at least, for storing CO2 for quite a long time. And those are indeed the natural accumulations of CO2 in around the world. But even more importantly, we have giant gas fields around the world that hold some even up to more than 70% of CO2. And Mother Nature has held that CO2 for actually millions of years underground. So that's one analog that we have, and you find them in Australia, you find them in the United States and other places. The second is indeed the underground storage of methane that we do in many places in Northwest Europe and other places around the world. I think in the Netherlands and Germany we have several places where industry is actually storing gas just in order to be using it when there is a peak demand for gas. So that's ongoing, is indeed entirely manageable in terms of the reservoir management that oil and gas companies are doing, basically have been doing over the past 100+ years. And so we think we can manage those risks, and they're being managed at the moment. So there are natural occurrences of CO2 in huge quantities for millions of years, in fact.
Hello, my name is Marlies Huipels from ANHISA. I just have a practical question. What are you going to do with public acceptance? Because most people here will accept a CO2 injection. But I think if I go on the street now and start speaking to random people about it, they don't know what it is. And two, they get scared, I think, when you start telling we're going to inject CO2 in your backyard. So my question is, how are you going to work on that? Thank you.
Question for the only democratically elected person on the panel.
Well, the problem at the moment is that where we are storing CO2 the examples of CO2 storage at the moment are beneath the North Sea and beneath the Sahara Desert, which aren't hugely populated areas. So it's when people say, "Well, would you have the CO2 underneath your house?" It's hard to demonstrate that is already the case. I think the first thing is the big issue. Mark here referred to the climate change catastrophe and the climate change crisis. And at the moment, certainly in political terms, and I think amongst many sectors of the public, there isn't a sense of catastrophe or crisis. I mean, one of the reasons that CCS is not developing is because there is no such great impetus, because governments are not making this top of their top priority. So, if on the other hand, the IPCC reports come out next year and say, remind us that it is an absolute imperative, maybe the political climate will change again. But secondly, we come on to the fact that ultimately this has got to be member state-led. Member states have got to emphasise the importance of the technology, and they've got to do the explaining, and they've got to bring the public on board on that. But if there is no, the only reason we're doing CCS is to avoid climate change catastrophe. There's no point doing it. It's not like methane storage and what have you. We are only doing this to stop this gas being emitted into the atmosphere. There is otherwise no rationale at all for it. So the public have got to be on board, and they've got to be brought into the whole issue of fighting climate change. I think the third issue is simply, of course, to try and put this into a rational perspective. CO2 is an inert gas. I've just been drinking it in this because I prefer the fizzy water to the plain water. It's in our beer. It's in our Coca-Cola. It's in it's in our bodies. We breathe out slightly more than we breathe in. All this. It's there. CO2 is not a frightening gas. That said, there are gases out there which are frightening and which are beneath our feet. And in the case of Berlin, it's classically beneath the Olympic Stadium, a great methane reservoir. Here was a gas that we happily, and have done for more than a century, pump out of the ground, distribute across Europe in pipelines, and actually feed into our own homes where we set light to it. I mean, I've often said, I cannot believe that health and safety these days would ever allow us to pump an inflammable gas into our homes and set light to it, had we not been doing it for a century or more. So, but of course, that's the rational argument. That doesn't deal with the emotions. I gave a presentation in The Hague to a committee of the Dutch Parliament once, and a socialist MEP said to me, I'm very much in favour of CCS development, but I used to be a Greenpeace activist, and I know how easy it is to stir up opposition to anything on environmental grounds if you really want to.
Okay, thanks. Okay, any more questions? If not, actually, I want to talk about the politics a little bit, because there doesn't seem to be a great deal of dispute about the viability of the technology, but a great deal of doubt about the politics. And I would even venture the view at the moment, the notion of a single European energy and climate change policy is at risk of going backwards. I mean, if you see the divisions over reform of the ETS, if you see the focus on competitiveness compared to the commitment to the CO2 reduction goals, is it a question of timing? Is it just everything's overshadowed by the economic crisis and governments have no money to spend and therefore will only spend on domestic projects of direct benefit? So the sense of the European collective vision has dissipated for the time being? Is it just the stage we're at in the life of the two institutions that you work for, the Parliament and the European Commission? Do we have to wait until probably January 2015 for a renewed impetus on a renewed European drive on energy and climate policy?
I think I've done my bit. I mean, Mark and Maria.
Unless the monosyllabic.
Well, some of you may have read the Charlemagne column in The Economist last week. I was diplomatic before when I talked about a failure of the institutions of Europe to respond to a system crisis. But of course, any response, at least in the formal sense, has to come from the Commission as the only institution that can initiate laws. So I think between now and the end of the mandates, we are marking time. The policy issues are being paid lip service and little more than that. Marie was right to say the Commission will draw its next round of conclusions by the end of this year. But so far, none of the commissioners involved can say whether the policy will go forward with a legislative proposal in this mandate, or whether things will be put on hold until after the new mandates next year. And that you know, in the spring, some of Marie's colleagues would say, well, there will be a decision on that point by the summer. You know, maybe during July there will be another orientation debate in the college. We don't know yet, or at least I don't know yet. But that hesitation, let's call it, and the responsibility for that goes to the top. If Barroso can't give his portfolio commissioners a mandate to act now on what overall is the biggest crisis that we face, then you know, Barroso must take the can for that. For too long, I think he's been the 28th member of the European Council. He's not been an independent Commission President in the way that the treaties stipulate. And so long as we're in that type of situation with him as President or anyone else like him, we're going to continue to struggle to do what Europe is supposed to do, and that is to fix common challenges together.
Okay, Mary, I'm not going to ask you whether you think Mr. Barroso is an independent Commission President. Well, if you want to try and answer that, then I'd be very interested to hear. But I think what does DG Energy want to achieve by the end of this year, by the end of this Commission's mandate on the energy and climate change policies?
In defence of both the President and the institution, I can understand a degree of frustration that we haven't come out and thumped the table with a set of legislation that says thou shalt do X, Y, and Z by 2020 and by 25 and 2030, etc. I do believe the process that we're in now is the correct process. We have produced the Green Paper, which is the starting point for listening to views. And I think our job is to listen to views, and having heard the views, then to analyse them and come up with a framework. And that's exactly the process that we're in right now. And we have said that by the end of this year, we will come up with one or more papers, which will be a framework. It is true to say that at this point in time, it's not clear whether that framework would be accompanied by a legislative proposal on, for example, targets, one or more targets, or whether they're at European level, at national level, whatever. That decision hasn't been taken, and I don't think that decision will be taken until we see the comments and until we've done the analysis. And I think to rush forward with a knee-jerk reaction that would say we want, you know, a greenhouse gas emission of X, with or without targets on renewables, energy efficiency, as the case may be, without doing the analysis that defends that and explains that and sets out what the implications to those are, we would do a huge disservice, because we would be exposed entirely to criticism, and the criticism would be valid. So I think it isn't an opt-out to say, let's take the time to do it right and to prepare the ground. I think that's a very realistic and essential element that we have to do. And remember, we're in 2013. We have a framework to 2020. And what we don't want to do is to destabilize that framework. Now, I understand that investments take 5, 6, 7 years. So yes, the time is now to start thinking about it, because otherwise the investments post-2020 will slow down. But let us not, move away from our clearly established trajectory to 2020. Anything we talk about for 2030 has to start from success in 2020, because anything less is unacceptable. So it's not just because they pay my salary every month that I would say the Commission is correct. I genuinely think we have to do it in stages, and we have to do it in a measured way, and we have to do it in a calculated way, so that we are able to defend whatever proposals come out. But meanwhile, let's not, as they say, frighten the horses for what we're trying to achieve between now and 2020.
Good. We've moved a little bit away from the specific topic of CCS Do we have any more questions for this morning? If not, I think I'll invite Tim Bertels from Shell to give concluding remarks, and I'm every confidence that Tim will bring us back to the subject of CCS. Tim, come and join us, please.
Simon, so I do have the pleasure of providing the conclusions of this debate. First of all, I would like to thank the panel and the audience. I think we had a very interesting and a very lively and informative debate. And I think I would like to highlight a couple of items that we have broad consensus on, and that is that the need for CCS as a core technology to basically emphasize the reduction of carbon emissions in the EU, but also to keep the competitiveness of the EU in place and to make sure that we match the energy demand. So following the need for more energy in the EU and other places in the world, and the need to reduce carbon emissions, and also the need for the EU to remain competitive, I think we all agree that CCS is a core technology. So I would like to focus on three things here. One is the why we need CCS. I think we mentioned it several times. What's being done about it, what progress is being made, and what is needed in the EU towards moving forward. And I think it has been mentioned, we need CCS because CCS provides a very significant contribution to mitigation, up to 20%, I think, by 2050, is what the IEA says. Secondly, it is indeed the only technology that can actually address the stock problem, so the problem of CO2 accumulating in the atmosphere. With bio, if we link it to bio, CCS can actually take CO2 out of the atmosphere, and there is no other technology that can do it at this moment. So that's very important. Thirdly, without CCS, we are disadvantaged in terms of cost. So it will cost the world, and certainly also the EU, more to decarbonize without having CCS in the portfolio. And some estimates have been done by the IEA in terms of having to spend maybe more than $1 trillion or euros extra if we don't get CCS in the mix. So that's going to be very important. And then finally, CCS is not only for power, it's also for industry. I think the estimate was that about half of it will be delivering mitigation for industry and the other half for power. So it is something that we can actually use for other decarbonization needs as well. I'm thinking about the steel sector, cement sector, etc. So that's the need for CCS. What are we doing? There's actually quite a bit happening in the world on CCS. It was mentioned 8 projects going on. Indeed, most of it is linked to ER at the time being, but more and more coming up for storage. We have another 8 that are under construction. So that's 16 projects, which is quite a bit in the world. So that's the good news. There is quite a bit happening. In Shell, we have just taken FID last year on a project in Alberta in Canada. And really, I would like to invite you all, if you have an opportunity at some stage, go and watch a storage project or a capture project. We also have actually 1 or 2 small scale in Europe. So really nothing beats the eye in terms of seeing what's actually happening out there. So we are doing quite a bit. There's also R&D ongoing in the industry globally in terms of how we can reduce the costs, how we can think better about what happens exactly in the CO2 down the wells that we injected in more detail. So quite a bit is going on in R&D, and there's quite a bit of collaboration between universities. So things are happening in the EU. I think we came to the conclusion that things are a bit stalled here, and we do have some disadvantages in terms of the ETS price gone down, and in terms of the economic malaise that we see in Europe. But going forward, I think we can look at the things that we do have, and that is in the short term the NER 300, which may actually deliver some projects. We sincerely hope, I think 9 projects in total may be asking for money from the NER 300. If we have a couple, at least we can demonstrate that this is working. That's a short term. In the long term, I think most of us will think that a strong ETS will actually help us in delivering decarbonization, which is, you may say, which is technology neutral and not favoring any particular technologies. A strong ETS 2030 post. In the medium term, we do need additional policy measures to keep CCS going. Because after the NER 300 funds have been dried up, we may need an extension perhaps for that, but certainly we need support in the commercialization phase of CCS. And I'm talking 2020 to 2030 there, where we would ramp up from a few NER 300 projects, supported projects, to up to commercialization post 2030. The EU CCS communication have mentioned some tools. I wouldn't go into those tools, but I would certainly say that we, in Shell, we are anxiously awaiting what's coming out of that consultation, and we're looking into the possibilities of getting some additional policy measures. So ultimately, in short, I think we would welcome an overarching greenhouse gas reduction target, which will certainly help CCS, and a clear commitment to CCS so that industry and the players actually in CCS can see a future for carbon capture storage and not just a few single projects that may only be there for demonstration. So we really need to see a ramp up towards a CCS future which is holding significant amounts of CCS projects. So I think, to summarize, CCS is a short-term cost, maybe, but it is certainly a significant long-term benefit. And I mentioned the benefits that we will have from deploying CCS next to other kinds of mitigation. So it requires that political will to spend that short-term money to get a very significant long-term benefit back. And that needs to be done in the policy framework for 2030. So let me thank the panel and the audience once again for this debate, which I think was very lively, and I'm sure will be continued after this and over the coming months and years. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. I'd like to thank all the panelists and to you, the audience, for joining us this morning. A couple of things just to flag up. You will find on your desks feedback forms. If you could take a few minutes just to fill them out, it doesn't even take a few minutes. They're extremely valuable to us in getting your feedback and helping us to improve the quality, or to continue to improve the quality of future events. Our next event in the Comet Vision series will be on shale gas in the second week of October, the 8th or 9th of October. I think I would encourage you, Comet Visions is a debating platform. I would encourage you to go onto the website and take part in the online debate about the issues we've been discussing today. And I think, and there's also a poll, isn't there? A paper poll, not an online poll, a paper poll. Yeah, sorry, there's also a paper poll with a question related to this morning's discussions. And finally, we are serving, well, I'm not serving, but coffee will be served outside, so you continue the debate and the conversation outside. So thank you all very much for being here this morning. Thank you.